fans, it's Taco Mans, and today I have a new Overland roof rack from Garage88. I'm going to be unboxing and installing it on my Tacoma and sharing my first impressions. I'm super excited to finally have this style of roof rack, so let's talk about it. Starting with the unboxing, we have the two side rails, which I'll open up later. Then we have two crossbars. One is unpainted, which goes behind the wind deflector. Then we have the gasket to reduce wind noise. Now we have the rest of the crossbars. So far everything's been packaged really nicely, individual components are protected, and there's some foam around the whole box. Also, based on my first impressions, the quality of the bars seem pretty great. Now we have the wind deflector for the front of the rack, which has a clean-cut Garage88 logo on it. Then a box of all the hardware. Everything is labeled clearly, which is nice. There's mounting hardware for the wind deflector, aluminum spacers for the side rails. This bag happened to be open, but no big deal because no parts were damaged. Hardware to mount the side rails, and hardware to mount the crossbars. Like everything else in the box, the side rails were also carefully packaged and arrived in excellent condition. I found that the rails were not perfectly straight, but I'm guessing this is common and it won't be an issue once all the crossbars are installed. The owner of Garage88 was kind enough to include this really cool tire deflator, which I was not expecting, so thank you to Garage88. He also included this handle for the roof rack that comes with a light, which would normally have to be ordered separately. Now before I continue, this video was made in collaboration with Garage88. They provided this rack at a discounted rate for me to review, but I was the one who reached out to them because I wanted to work with a local Canadian company that makes affordable alternatives to overlanding gear. The cost of camping gear continues to rise, so I'm grateful for companies that still make relatively budget-friendly options. And if you end up wanting this rack or anything else from Garage88, you can use my discount code TACOMANS8 to get 8% off your whole order. That being said, this is an unbiased video and any opinions expressed are my own. Alright, let's get to the installation. We're going to use the factory mounting holes on my second gen Tacoma. There's no drilling required for the cab, but you do have to drill holes in the trims at the top of the roof, so I started by removing the trims. You can do this by hand or with a screwdriver, just be careful to avoid damaging the paint. Then I used green tape to mark where the holes are. The holes are normally covered if you've never used them before. You can check out my previous videos to see how it looks from factory. I marked the 5 hole locations on each side. I took the time to clean the area of dirt and properly dried it. Then I reinstalled the trim, and now I can transfer the marks onto the trim. Just keep in mind it's not perfectly centered, it's slightly towards the center of the cab, so make sure your holes are off-center. To make the holes, I used a combination of drill bits to slowly increase the hole size, along with a step-up drill bit and a knife to remove some extra material. The step-up drill bit helped a lot because I didn't have a regular drill bit big enough to make the holes. I took my time to do it to avoid any mistakes and more importantly avoid ripping out one side of the trim since I'm drilling off center. This part was a little tedious and took quite a bit of time. Now that they're done, I put the trim back on the truck and dry fitted all the spacers and bolts to make sure everything lined up. Then at the back of the cab, on both sides, the back end of the trim needs double-sided tape to hold down the curved portion. Then I prepared my mounting hardware, bolts, lock washers, and flat washers in that order, 5 sets per side. I'm using some RTV silicone for the threads to prevent water from entering the cab. Just a small amount on each bolt, and I hand tighten everything down with no tools. I'll come back at the end to snug everything down. Next is the wind deflector. The deflector is fastened to the unpainted crossbar using this slot nut so that it becomes rigid and doesn't flex. To do this, I assembled the bolt, lock washers, and flat washers in that order. Then installed it through the front side of the deflector and on the back end the slot nut. Make sure it's loose enough that there's enough space for the crossbars in between. So then I just slid the crossbar between the hardware and tightened everything down. To finish the deflector assembly, I installed the gasket. I cut the other end off camera, but I would recommend using some type of wire snips as opposed to scissors because there's a small strip of metal inside the gasket. To install the wind deflector, I'll need to use the crossbar hardware. Like everything else, you'll need one bolt, one lock washer, and one flat washer in that order. I decided to assemble all of them now since I knew this would take a while and I was going to need them to install all the crossbars. Then I went to the front of the cab and installed the wind deflector using the slot at the front end. After installing one screw, I went to the other side to do the other two screws. Then I went back and finished the original side and tightened all the screws down. Now I was ready to install the rest of the crossbars. I placed a mat on the roof of the cab to avoid damage and carefully placed all the crossbars up there. With all the hardware ready on my ladder, it was just a matter of installing and tightening all the screws. For the back crossbar, because my truck has the antenna or fin, I installed it vertically. The rest of the bars can be installed horizontally with the slots facing upward so it can be used to install gear at a later time. I started all the screws by hand to avoid cross-threading, and I finished everything with an impact drill. I was careful to not over-torque it and avoid damaging the hardware. Then I went back to the bolts with a wrench and snugged everything up. First I made sure to look at the rack from the front of the truck to make sure it was lined up properly. I'm using a 10mm socket. I'm using both a 3/8 drive with an extension and a 1/4 inch drive with no extension. I found it necessary because some of the bolts were under the crossbar, so you need a shorter socket to access it. There are no torque values for these bolts, so I just bottomed them out and used my own judgment to make sure they were tight. And just like that, the roof rack install is complete. Now before we get to the end result, I'll say this was a pretty easy install. The labeled hardware was really helpful to figure everything out. There's not much room for error except for drilling the holes in the trim. I found that part a bit tedious and it is permanent, so if you want to remove this rack, you'll need to come up with a trim solution. In terms of the quality of the rack, I'll say the materials feel solid. The cutouts are good quality with no burrs in the metal. The powder coating is great, although I noticed a couple imperfections. It looks like this area was used to hang the part during painting. I personally have no issues with this as it's barely visible from afar. The threaded holes were completely unpainted to allow smooth installation. The overall feel of the materials and powder coating feels good to the touch. In terms of the design, I think it's a sleek looking rack. I like that the crossbars have slots for mounting hardware and there's multiple tie down points along the side rails. Overall, I'm loving this rack so far. I'll be making a longer term review of this rack after I've tested it, so look out for that in the future. But for now, let's enjoy the end results. Let me know in the comments if you would get this rack for your overlanding build. Please like, share, subscribe, and I will catch you on the next. Taco Man's out. Peace.